Welcome back to the I'm Book podcast. I'm April O'Leary, and I'm here today with Estelle Erasmus, who is the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published. And that's exactly what we talk about around here. So I was super excited to get connected with her a few months back. And you want to tell them how we got connected?
Yes, Anna David put us in touch because I was thinking of expanding the panel that I was on that I am moderating for Podfest Expo 2024. And I had originally asked her, and she was in the process of having a baby. She had a surrogate, but she had a baby. And
Yes.
she recommended you. And then I went
Yeah.
and listened to your podcast to make sure that it was a good fit for my session, which was going to be on writing and publishing podcasts. And so that was a while ago, but unfortunately, you had to go to Naples and fortunately for you have some wonderful event that you're scheduled for next week. So,
Yeah.
but I'm so glad that you were so kind to invite me to join your program. So I'm thrilled.
Well, I was thrilled, and it's always nice to be referred to. And Anna David, who's a mutual friend, she's on a previous episode of our podcast. So if you scroll back a ways, you can hear her. And yeah, she just had a baby and she's in California. So, hey, getting to Florida from California with a newborn isn't necessarily my cup of tea for sure.
Exactly. And she's lovely.
Um,
She was on my podcast, Freelance Writing Direct, and I was on her podcast. And I think I was one of the later episodes before she actually went and, experienced motherhood for the first time.
Yeah, it's so funny. I love how connected our industry is, and especially women in publishing, and to have that sort of camaraderie together where I think we all know we're on the same team, but it's not a competition, it's all a collaboration. So thank you for being on the show. And I would love to talk to you about your profession and your book and how those two are married together. And so let's start with professionally who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, I'm somebody who has had many pivots in my 3 decades plus career. And I started out in public relations, and I very quickly realized that I wanted to be on the other side, in the media side. And so my first job in publishing was at Woman's World magazine as an
Mhm.
associate beauty editor, and this was in the 90s. And I kept moving up. And at the time in publishing, it was very easy once you understood how publishing worked, how the internal structure worked, you could move up very quickly. And in the beauty department at Woman's World, which was a huge and still is a huge circulation publication, a weekly with, I think at the time it had it had 2 million newsstand sales. And now I think maybe it's even doubled to 4. And I was in the beauty department, and I had 7 deadlines a week, April. So I had to interview experts from Orbey to Frederick Fekkai to Marina Valmy, Christine Valmy, Ivana Trump. I had to talk to people and get their insight. And I had a woman talk column, I had a beauty column. I worked with columnists. I did my own, a woman talk was later, but I had my own column for Woman's World. It was a beauty tips column. And I would interview people, and then we would go around the country in a Winnebago and do makeovers in California and Florida. We'd get up at 3 in the morning to do photo shoots. I'd help book the models. It was like I did A to Z with everything beauty and working within the company. And so I learned to write really fast because I had 7 deadlines a week. I had to
Mm.
interview, I had to write it up, I had to parse my words, I had to edit for the space in the magazine, and work with the editor, work with the art director, and all that. And it taught me to be very succinct. It
Mm.
taught me to use words effectively in a way that's going to make an impact, because again, you have limited word space in a print publication. And even today with the internet, you even have smaller word space. But I
Mhm.
had like 2-page spreads that was mostly photos. And so the work that I did was what I call service journalism, which is really, and I have a whole section in my book Writing That Gets Noticed called At Your Reader's Service, which basically talks about service journalism as stories or articles that help improve your life in some way. And so when I did it, it was the beauty and the health, and it's entails subheads like breaking something up and creating formulas. So the most expensive, the least expensive, try this at home. That's all service journalism, because you could immediately say, yes, I have $100 to spend, and so I'll buy this foundation. Or I can only go to a drugstore, so I'm going to buy this foundation, and this is why this is being recommended to me. Or I can make something at home. And, this is the how-to aspect. So that's service journalism. And you could do that with most expensive, least expensive. You could do that with try this, don't try that. You did that with, how they did the fashion do's and don'ts seen on the street. That's all service journalism. And that's what I honed my teeth on at Woman's World. And I moved up very quickly. I went to American Woman magazine, where I was a senior editor. I think I started as an associate editor, and then I became a senior editor. And I was helping with the cover lines at that point. I was writing my own stories. I was writing for other publications that the same publisher had, which was New Body. And in fact, New Body had somebody with the name of Bobby Brown, who had written the beauty column. And at the time, this was the 90s, she said, oh, I'm going to start a makeup company. And so I can't do the column anymore. So this is Estelle, why don't you take the column over? So I took the column over. And I was this single woman living in the city. I would work till 9 at night. I would go to parties. I would go to dinners. I would, I always call it a perk-rich, cash-poor lifestyle at the time. Then,
right.
And then I moved up. I became an editor-in-chief, and more money followed, and more opportunities flowed. And so I became the editor-in-chief of 5 national consumer publications, including Hachette's Body by Jake, where I met David Pecker, who was in the news a couple of years ago because of his relationship with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, he had published his magazine, Trump Style, I think it was called. And I never worked on that publication, but I worked on Body by Jake, which was Don't Quit, Jake Steinfeld. So it was really kind of a glamorous time in publishing. It was also a hard-working time in publishing, but print was king. And then I got involved in early online publications like music.com and iVillage, and I wrote for those publications. And I really got to understand the needs of online writing. And what really helped was the publications, aside from Woman's World, that I was working at were smaller. So I wore many hats. I was editor-in-chief. I was curating content. I was looking at books to figure out what I can excerpt. I was figuring out what experts I wanted to interview. I was figuring out the people who were teaching at the seminar center. Maybe they could write a column for me, or maybe they could write an article. And so I was very involved. I always called myself a pop culture vulture. And so this was kind of my this is what I was doing. And how do I say that? Whatever. And I ended up, after 9/11, publishers were kind of pulling in the money, and they weren't like doing too much, allowing too much freelancing. And at that point, I was freelancing for publishers and starting their publications. And so after Body by Jake, when I started launching publications like Wit, Women in Touch for Gramercy Publishing, and Esthétique, which was a beauty and skincare magazine, and the American Breast Cancer Guide, they pulled in the money. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do now? So it's time to pivot. at the time, I had met my now husband of almost 19 years. And I was in midlife in my 40s. And I thought, well, I think I want to marry this guy. And I think he'd be a great dad. And as in my life, when people tell me you can't do something, I'm like, you know what? That's your reality. My reality is different. So the reality at the time was in your 40s, getting married, you have a bigger chance of getting into a terrorist attack. That was what it said. It was later debunked, but that was the popular vernacular. And I said, you know what? It's okay. I think I can do what I need to do. And then they said it's not good to have a kid in your 40s. And in fact, I did research and it showed actually you live longer if you have a kid later in life. And I said, I'm going to explore some medical help and IVF and all that. And I'm going to do what I need to do. With that same token, the 9 till night lifestyle that I had, where I worked till 9 at night, especially when I was closing an issue, which is all hands on deck, and you're looking at the galleys and you're looking at, the typesetting and you're looking at everything back then. Now it's probably different. And I would say, uh, being somebody who was married, who wanted to have a child, it was a different lifestyle. It wasn't the right lifestyle anymore. So I pivoted. I went into medical education for 7 years while I was dealing with infertility.
Mhm.
And I learned all about PubMed and researching and studies and what makes a good study and what makes a good cohort. And I worked with physicians and I worked with doctors and I interviewed them. And so I built my tool set even with more gravitas than I'd had before in the pop culture way of the world. And this is something that I bring into my book. I distill my 3 decades of experience on both sides of the publishing wall as somebody who is an editor, as somebody who has published in over 150 publications, including viral pieces for the New York Times, the Washington Post, Yahoo, and had my students do that, and somebody who teaches at NYU. And I have I was awarded the 2023 Teaching Excellence Award. So that I'm very honored
Congratulations.
about that. And I've also received a 2023 Zibby Award, which is through the publisher Zibby Owens, who's not my publisher. New World Library is my publisher, but Zibby Owens is also a book influencer, and she awards book awards, and my book was named the best book for the writer. So I put in my book all my experience. I included my medical education experience in the fact that databases are so important, how to understand how to vet experts, how to find databases and I give 100 or so databases that you can use that are credible if you're writing an article. I also talk about essays because I've been very prolific at writing essays. And my most recent one is in Shondaland that talks about parenting with hearing loss. And I sort of became a parenting writer. That was another pivot. Once my daughter was born, I became a parenting writer, which is something I'd never even thought of that time when I was, single in the city and I was a dating expert. That was the other thing I did. So there have been many, many pivots. And I think what's important about what I do is I always saw publishing as a long game. And I hope I'm not giving too long an answer, but I always saw publishing as a long game. And I teach my students that you have to see it as you have to have resilience, you have to have grit, you have to continually look to see what the next avenue is that you can build your tool set and your skill sets. And so I did that with social media, and we'll talk more about that as well. So this is a very long answer to your very short question.
Well, with having 3 decades of experience, I expected that you would have a lot of experience in a lot of different ways, and I think that one of the things you said, which resonates for anyone who's trying to endeavor to create a career in writing or publishing or as an author, is pivoting. And a lot of times, the authors that we work with, we may get their first draft manuscript, and it's written more for the writer writes for themselves than they do thinking about what the reader wants.
Yes.
And that's a big process to shift the lens to the reader. And I loved you talking about even in writing for the magazines, you're writing in a way that's in service to others. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important. And as your life changed, your writing was able to change with it. There's no way, and I always think it's funny because I'm a parent as well. Um, you can't give parenting advice if you're not a parent. It's just like, to me, sometimes it's like, really? So you did that with your kids? And if they don't have kids, it's like, I remember my daughter, who's now almost 21, my middle daughter, when she went through this period of time where she only wanted to wear her shoes on the wrong feet. And there was just like no fighting her about it. And I finally gave in. I was like, if that feels comfortable for you, go for it. And my mother-in-law was like beside herself, like, you need to make her wear that's on the right feet. I was like, go ahead and try. You could try. I'm not fighting that.
It's part
So,
of building their sense of self and empowering them in a way, saying, okay, you're making a choice. You're going to live with that choice. If
yeah,
you
yeah.
say
So if your feet grow out like this, don't call
you
your
can't
mom.
walk and you flip flop over, well, now you know. Now you've
Yeah.
learned something. As my husband always calls it, like a teachable moment.
Yes, that is so true. So, so here you are, right? You've done all this writing in service of others, other magazines, other outlets, other online publications, other people's, writing and teaching. And so when was that moment for you that you decided, like, I need to distill all this into a book?
Well, I was teaching, so I had taught at NYU in the early aughts, and I had taught writing health and beauty for magazines and how to make an impact in magazines. And in 2019, I had an opportunity again to teach at NYU. And so I was very happy to do that. And I started teaching writing about midlife and beyond. And I taught writing parenthood. And later I taught micro memoir. And I started doing the high school academy program, which is a different program where high school students come from all over the world to learn journalism with me for a week or a couple of weekends throughout the year. And so that's separate from my work with the School of Professional Studies, which is adults. And so I did that, and then the pandemic hit, right? And so everything was I had started in person, and then I went online. And I was putting a lot of material up on the site. And I also teach for Writer's Digest, which is also a lot of online teaching. And somebody said to me, this is amazing information that I have never seen anywhere else. I have seen the way that you break down and analyze pitches to explain exactly what it is that works and why and how to fix it. And in my editing, I always break it down. Like, this is why I'm making this editing change. So, my premise is you buy someone a fish and you feed them for the night. You teach them how to fish and they can feed themselves for the rest of their lives. And that was my idea of how to teach. And my greatest compliment is when my students say to me, Estelle, it's my voice on the page. It's their voice on the page, but it's my voice in their head.
Mm.
So I'm guiding them. I'm like their literary fairy godmother. And so somebody said, one of my students, you need to put this in a book. And I thought, you know what? I would love to put this in a book. But I thought very hard about the kind of book that I wanted to do. And I knew that while I wanted to be service, right? It's 352 pages of tips, tricks, strategies, advice from my years and all my experience with all my students and real world practical advice. I also wanted to share my stories because I feel that that's what really resonates for the reader. When I've written my essays and I've showed my vulnerabilities and I've showed my struggle, whether it's in parenting or, fighting with my husband or dealing with bullying from my child, that has resonated with people. So I wanted it in there that I pivoted. I wanted it in there that I dealt with infertility. I wanted it in there that I was the dating diva and that I married later. And so that was really important to me. And I feel that it makes my book resonate for people who read it because they see me as the real flawed person that I am, who is now trying to use my mistakes that I made. I made a ton along the way, and I share in the book, from the point of even sending an email to somebody and not getting rid of the email, the person's name below that I had sent it to before. I mean, these are things that people need to be aware of. So when you're forwarding something, you have to get rid of everything underneath, and then you have to, make sure the font is correct. And so those are just things, or to making mistakes, spelling mistakes, obvious spelling mistakes, and other things that I've done wrong. And so I wanted to include that as well as my advice. And so that's really how that came about. And then the other part of it is very synchronistic, which is a lot of how my life evolves. And I could tell you about that part also.
I would love to hear. So it's interesting that your student was the one who recommended you do it, that you didn't have that thought yourself before. I find that so curious.
Yeah, see, I see myself as a storyteller, and I've been working on a novel, I've been working on a memoir, and I just didn't think, because again, like people had said, oh, there's so many writing books out there, like I never, and that's always what I heard, and I just didn't. And then I realized I do have something real strong to offer. And around that same time, around the pandemic, I got a column at Writer's Digest called All About the Pitch, and I've had many columns in my life and my career, but this was my first publishing column. And, I've had dating columns and health columns and beauty columns and alternative health columns and vitamin columns. And this was my first publishing column, where I interviewed experts and interviewed editors and broke down pitches with my input and their input. And so that also gave me, aside from my teaching and the webinars I was doing and all my students who were really accruing at that point, that gave me kind of another feeling of solidity in the ground under my feet in what I was now wanting to achieve and do.
I love that. Well, and you have this street credibility to write the book, which I think is always important for any author. Is like write what you know, write what you're good at, right? And sometimes the thing is, I feel like the thing that you know so well, it's becomes so second nature that you forget that other people might not know that. They might not, and you're in the teaching role, so I know you probably stay very aware of that because you're always working with students. But in the real world, right, the people that we work with who are writing nonfiction books, sometimes the most obvious thing that they've been doing so well for so long, they forget that they were a beginner at one point, and people need the experience that they have.
You're
So your
Yeah.
so your path to publishing, how did that look for you?
So, it's interesting what you say before April, because you're right. Like I will say something or think of something and say to my student, I'll think, oh, well, I'm sure they already know it. And they'll be like, wow, that's such an interesting way of looking at it. And I realize that all the knowledge that I've accrued on both sides, as somebody who's assigned to writers, as somebody who's a prolific writer myself and an editor, is information that, as long as I package it in such a way that it is easily accessible for them in whatever style of learning they have. So that's why I use, annotation. That's why if you're visual, so I'll do the annotated stuff, which I did in my column and I have in my book. Or if you are auditory, then sometimes I'll do videos, or we'll talk on the phone or talk via Zoom. Or, people have different styles of learning. Maybe sometimes they just need to take copious amounts of notes and then
Yeah.
review it when they have a moment. And so,
Mhm.
that's important. And my path to publication for this book is not it is very interesting, because yes, it came from a student, it came from me thinking, I hear no, but maybe this could be yes, right? And then it came from starting to look at different agents. And I've had agents in my life at different iterations. I had done a beauty book back in the early aughts I'd co-authored it with a dermatologist. And I'd worked with some agents that didn't come to fruition. I was going to do an anthology at one point, and that didn't work out. But what happened here was I've been a longtime member of a organization called the American Society of Journalists and Authors. And I've spoken at many of their conferences. And in 2017, I was the chair of the national conference, which always took place until 2 years ago in New York. And so I was very ensconced in ASJA. And in fact, I did a podcast for them called ASJA Direct, which was the precursor to Freelance Writing Direct, which is the podcast I do now. And so for ASJA, they had a virtual aspect of the conference called Client Connections. And I decided that I would meet as many agents as I could. I would sign up. They have a lottery. And I think a lot of people that year weren't sure how to work it or whatever. So I ended up meeting with a ton of agents. And one thing I vowed to myself, and I always teach my students, and I tell them this, is I don't like any kind of concept that makes you the supplicant and somebody else having an enormous imbalance of power. And I feel in our industry, that is how people look at agents. Like you are looking to them, pick me, pick me, pick me, as my teenage daughter, who's 14, would say, a pick me girl. And that is the feeling. And so I knew the tools I wanted in my tool chest, because I'm always adding to my tool chest, would be to find ways to vet the agents and make sure that they are somebody that fits me, as well as me being taken on by them. So what I did was I got a subscription to Publishers Marketplace, which, you help authors all the time. I'm sure you are very well aware of Publishers Marketplace. But what a lot of people don't realize is you don't have to sign up for a year subscription. You can sign up month by month. And what I would do is I researched the agents. I'm a big believer in doing a deep dive before I interact with someone. And so I would research the agents and I would see when their last sales were. And some of them hadn't had sales since 2015. And some of them had never sold a writing book. And some of, so there were things that I said, okay, well, I'm assessing you as much as you're assessing me. And that put me in a better headspace. Mm-hmm. And I tell my students to do that as well, because I think anything that's going to empower us and make us feel that way. And so there was an agent I met with, Rita Rosenkrantz, and she said, oh, I love writing books. I love books about writing. And I had already researched that she had sold a writing book, more than one writing book. And I knew that she was somebody that I thought that I could work with well. And she ended up being my agent. But at the same time, I believe that we should really look into every aspect that we have to meet people, to get connected. And so somebody had told me about the Atlanta Writers Conference, and I signed up virtually 1 year to have a query looked at for a novel I was working on. And I liked my experience. And I thought, all right, let me have my proposal in progress looked at. And so I signed up to meet with Georgia Hughes, who is the editorial director of New World Library. And she got me right away. Like, we did it virtually. She got what I was trying to do. And she even awarded best sample, like of the 35 people that she met with at the conference. And she awarded my 20-page sample, which ended up being a 70-page proposal, but it was a 20-page sample because that's all you could give. She awarded best sample. And then she said, do you have an agent? If you don't, you don't have to have one, but if you do, I could wait till you get one. And at that point, I said, I told Rita, I said, I'm not cutting you out of anything. You know, I would like to have an agent represent me, but this is somebody that, and she goes, oh, I've worked with her on deals before. And I said, perfect. So that's really what happened. We went out as an exclusive, and I had a relationship with New World Library from way back when. And I talk about it in the book that when I was in my 20s, I would go to this New Age bookstore. And one of the books that I saw was Creative Visualization by Shakti
Yeah,
Gawain.
I have that book.
It's an amazing book,
Yeah,
still in print, still very successful. And she's passed away many years ago. She was a co-founder of New World Library. And that book changed my life because it
yeah.
taught me that your thoughts can create your reality, not in a very like namby-famby way, but in a way that where you focus, where you put your intention, your energy goes. And it's a very important tenet, and not everyone understands it. And her book does a lot to explain that. And so I put that in the book because I feel that it it was not an accident that I saw that book, and that New World Library which they have the premise that books that change lives. And what I really want my book to do is to change lives, to make people feel inspired, to make people feel they can do it. They have the tools, the toolkit, the craft, because you can't do it without craft. As you know, you work with authors all the time. And so that was a big part of how my journey came together.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's funny because I think we probably read a lot of the same books, and I have that book, and it's small. It's like a thin little book, right? The Creative
They have
Visualization book.
a large reader size one now, which is really funny. It's like really big. I got that one too. I had the small one,
That's
but
so
I also
funny because I'm
got
like,
the
I
big
probably have it on my bookshelf back here. Not this little one. I've got some bigger bookshelves here, but I could picture the cover. It's very, I mean, the one I have is from maybe the 70s. Would
yeah,
that be as,
that's when it came out. That's when they
yeah.
started.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. That is funny. So, I love what you're sharing too about this, the power of taking your research into your own hands. As a writer, you already had that skill set because you had to research, interview people, you had to research stuff for your columns, all of this. So that came again naturally to you. But one of the things that with people we work with who are generally first time authors, and a lot of them don't have a lot of writing experience and they don't know anything about publishing, is kind of educating them about what their options are. Because some people like you who have this vast amount of experience and you understand publishing way better than most people, understand the world of literary agents and how to find the right one. And it is a lot like dating in the sense that you want someone to partner with, but then also kind of getting into the traditional world where, in the independent world, there's a lot of other choices too. So it really does behoove the writer to do their research and figure out, where do I fit best, even for you to know that New World could be a good home for you,
Yeah.
because of certain reasons. So, all of that, taking all of that into consideration, I think is a huge part of being a writer, because you do get to carve your path in the ways that you want to, deliberately through visualization, or if you don't, it's going to be a haphazard journey to God only knows where.
And I think it's knowing yourself, right? So,
Mhm,
I've been in the business a long time, but I didn't know myself as well when I first started out in the work
mhm.
world, in the publishing world, in the magazine world. And so knowing who I am makes me know what's important to me, and makes me realize that not only do I try and empower my teenage daughter, right?
Mhm.
But I try to empower my students. I try to empower myself. So you feel that you have all the tools. I use the word tools in your tool chest that you can access. You can research something. You can go to a conference, perhaps. You can do a virtual conference. You can find a free resource. You can pay for a resource for a month. You can do there are many, many avenues where you can enrich your knowledge or build your craft. You can you have a podcast, which anybody can listen to and learn about publishing books. I have a podcast, Freelance Writing Direct, where I have authors like Cheryl Strayed and Ann Hood come, and I have editors who are assigning. So if you want to learn that, that's free. That's strictly free. Or people can hire me as a coach, or they can pay for NYU, or Writer's Digest, or a webinar that's sometimes less. So there are many, many, or buy the book for a certain
Of
under
course,
20
that's the
bucks.
main thing. Yeah.
So if you start, and this is part of what Shakti Gawain talks about, if you start putting these little seeds, right, into what you're doing with intent and focus, you will get there one step at a time. It doesn't have to be the 10,000 steps that, Malcolm Gladwell talks about, that I have done in my career, but it could be putting these seeds in, and every day you nurture a step towards your goal or your empowerment, whether you're a first-time author, whether you're a blogger who wants to write a book, whether you're interested in self-publishing,
Mhm.
whatever it is, you can make the most of whatever situation that you're in by arming yourself with knowledge.
Mhm.
I would say information is power, and I really strongly believe that.
I totally agree with that. And I think, there's so many questions, there's so many more things we could talk about here. And I love that, your book writing that gets noticed. I recommend everyone who's listening to purchase that book if you're at all interested in writing. I
Thank
think
you.
it's a key to learn from people that are ahead of you. I think that's true with everything, right? Like I'm in a Ashtanga yoga class now, and I love my teacher, and I've only halfway through the primary series, but it's like I need the teacher to take me to the next pose and to show me what I'm not doing right in the pose that I'm currently on. And so working with someone who has all of this experience as you do in writing can really help expedite that process. So you don't need the 10,000 steps necessarily, because you might be able to avoid some potholes along the way,
Yeah,
hopefully.
and like you said, April, a good teacher breaks it down. So if you want to write an essay, I tell you how to make an impact from the hook, from the beginning. I explain what a hook is. I talk about the ending of an essay has to transform, show a transformation, leave a gift for the reader, I call it. And I give
Mhm.
tools and tactics like circling back, pulling something from the beginning of the essay. And then I analyze a modern love essay by William Dameron, an essay in Salon, an essay that was in Atlantic City Lab that's now in Bloomberg, to really show why something is effective. And I feel that's how people learn and grow. And it's not just overwhelming them with information, but it's breaking it down in palatable steps that you can follow. That's my whole premise.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, learning the craft of writing is different than being a writing journaling for your own purposes. There is skill, there is ability to learn from experts like Estelle. There's books to read, podcasts to listen to, conferences to go to. And so the career path of becoming a writer is so rich, and there's so many facets to it. And I feel like that's one thing that I love also about publishing is there's always more to learn. You can never know everything. And it's the conversations you have and the people you meet and the seeds, like you said, that you plant. And I always say in publishing a book, the book will open doors that you could never imagine. Like you don't know where the book is going to take you. And so you can have some idea, you can chart your course in some ways, but what have been some of the things that have happened to you because of this book specifically? Have there been surprising elements along the way that
I've been invited on a ton of podcasts, and I love doing podcasts because I have a podcast, but also being on a podcast is you get exposed to somebody else's audience. And so every time I'm on a podcast with aspiring people who are listening are aspiring writers, or people who want to write a book, or people who want to craft something and they don't know, or they want to write an article and maybe they would have gone to the wrong resource before my book. Like maybe they would have looked for medical information and found gone Google and found a site and not read or understand that a pharma company owns the site. And so it's not a journalistically viable resource that could really embarrass you with an editor if you ever
Mhm.
would say, this is my resource, this is
Yeah.
my source. And so, showing people what to do, it helps them. It's like this education. And for me, so getting these opportunities, invited to speak even more than I do. I love speaking at conferences. I spoke at the Atlanta Writers Conference because obviously that's where Georgia and I met, and Georgia and I both spoke separately at the conference this past November. I speak often at the Writers Digest Conference, for ASJA, for many different places. And I feel that having a book is kind of shows, like I want to do, like I said to you, I'm a storyteller. So I'm working on a novel, I'm working on memoir. And having my writing book first, it's kind of like, that's my calling card. There it is. And if you want to understand about my writing, because I give examples of the viral article I wrote, like for the New York Times, How to Bully Proof Your Child, and how that affected me and what happened in my life. And if you're writing an article that goes viral, what you should do from a 1 week to a 6 month perspective, including this is your time to pitch editors, this is your time to pitch a book proposal. And so I just feel like it's having a book. I would, Anna David says something about it, like, you just never know what's going to happen. You have a book out there, and there you go. Like can always lead with it. And I think she said something like, always bring your book with you in some way. And I do. I have it in my bag. I bring it when I was traveling. Somebody saw it. I bought a little tote bag also on Vistaprint, and I had that. And I think that it's just a great feeling to have a book out there, not just with your nonfiction how-to help, making it a how-to book, but also having my stories there. Like I feel that's something that uh, is the essence of who I am. And I will write other books, but this is very special and very important to me. And it came out the way I wanted it to. And it was a real exemplar team with New World Library and a very collaborative process. And I think tomorrow, my episode with Georgia Hughes, the editorial director of New World Library, will be out. And we'll be talking about what she looks for and what works and what doesn't and what worked with our collaboration. So it's just been an amazing journey. And I recommend everyone dive in, especially with coaching help, like somebody like yourself who can really show them the ropes in a very focused and way that deals with intention. And the fact that I love that you know creative visualization and adhere to it in your own life, it just shows me that you're a really good coach and teacher with that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I love the collaborative process, as you said. Like when you're looking for a publisher, just like when you're looking for an agent, it's always important to feel like, can I work with this person? Because you're going to really get into the weeds with someone when you're going through the publishing process. And I always say that, it's like dating, like you said, not everybody's not for everybody. You got to find your right fit. And for your fit, it was New World Library. For the authors we work with, a lot of them are debut authors that don't have a lot of writing experience. So the path that you took is they would not be able to take that kind of path. It's a different path. But nonetheless, it's like having that, like, is my publisher, my editor, are they people I could talk to? Are they someone I can work with? Do I feel like there's a synergy between us? Is it someone that, like you said, you're on an equal playing field with? It's not that they're in charge. We always say, at the end of the day, you're the boss. Like, we want you to be happy with the end product. We want you to feel like this represents you well. And we're going to make suggestions along the way based on our experience. But if you disagree with it, ultimately, we want them to have the final say. And I think it's really important to know what kind of relationship you're looking for. And I think that you were very smart and very intentional with how you did it, and therefore you got a great result. And the book, that writing that gets noticed, find your voice, become a better storyteller, get published. I recommend everybody get that book, read it, take the advice, reach out to Estelle at her website, which is estelleerasmus.com, and
It's
I'll put that.
EstelleSErasmus.com.
Estelle S. Erasmus. Ooh, I forgot the S in there.
Yes, is important. Yeah.
Thank you. The S is important. The S is important, and I will put that in the show notes as well. What would be your encouragement or your next steps that you would say for somebody listening right now that's like, man, this lady has like so much experience, and there's no way that I could do what she did, but I would love to get on the path, or I would love, maybe a little encouragement about how to get started. Because, I think sometimes getting started when you haven't written a lot, but maybe you have a ton of success in your career, for example, or you've lived an amazing life, but you don't have that writer's voice or that writer's confidence yet. What would you recommend?
Well, I have to say it's separate. It's different for fiction writers, right? So for a fiction debut writer, it's really the story and the execution of that. So for fiction, learn craft, right? Listen to podcasts, get a couple of books out on writing novels, on, get Save the Cat writes a novel, right?
Yeah.
That's really helpful. Listen to, if you want to write memoir, listen to podcasts like Let's Talk Memoir, listen to podcasts like mine, listen to podcasts like The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, which I was recently on. And so if you want to write, so that's different, because with memoir, it's your story. What is the story that you're trying to tell? And it can't be, as one of the editors that I interviewed once said, it can't just be the sad story that I'm telling. There has to be something universal. So look at your idea, first of all, right? So if it's a book, your fiction, what is your story? What is your hook? What are your protagonists? What do they want? What do they need? How are they going to get it? Read books, spend $20, get Save the Cat Writes a Novel. Read, my book will help you craft that hook. It's not focused per se on books, but it's focused on the craft of writing. And listen to podcasts. And then if you want to spend a little bit more money, it's sort of like in the service thing, right? The free stuff, and then there are people that are doing webinars. If you join an organization, oftentimes you could join, like if you want to be, let's say you're a therapist, like I have many academics who are my students, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're therapists. And so they are not per se writers, but they have a different profession and they like to write. And so they're maybe they can spend a little bit more money. They'll take a course, or they'll take a seminar, or they'll go to a conference. And, there are many ways. Some conferences give grants, so they make it easier for you to go. There are fellowships, there are writing residencies. And just doing a little bit of research, there are MFA programs that will be fully funded. You can go to your state and look for a fully funded MFA program that you could do on the side. So there are so many ways. I would say look into all your resources and start establishing that. Definitely build your craft, whether you're writing a nonfiction how-to book, even with stories sprinkled in, whether you're writing nonfiction memoir, whether you're writing fiction, your craft is going to be important, because for fiction, you have to have the whole work done. It has to be done. And it has to, if you're submitting it to a publisher, if you're submitting it to an independent press, if you're self-publishing it, it still has to be interesting, have a hook, and you have to know how to bring the reader along. If you're doing something that's nonfiction based on what you are already teaching, what you're kind of test marketing out there, you have to have some way where it's already in the popular consciousness, because you know, I'm speaking about and I'm teaching about what I write about. Somebody else should be, if they want to write a book, let's say about knitting, they should maybe be heading up their local knitting circles, and they should be maybe creating a webinar about knitting and how to knit and start building their reputation that way. And we talked a little earlier, I think, offline about social media. Start building. With fiction, it's not as important. With nonfiction, it's more important to have a following. So if you can start building a following by, going on TikTok, although they say TikTok is for very much younger authors. I'm on TikTok, Estelle Erasmus. That's where I am everywhere on social media. And you can do fun little things. Like lately, I did a vignette with someone where her daughter was she was pulling up me online and saying, okay, here's your coach. And the girl thought I was a soccer coach. And I'm like, no, I'm a writing coach. And, oh, breaking through the noise is hard with kids, but also with our readers. So I said that. And that's been getting a lot of play. And so there's so many different things you can do. And one of the easiest ways to start curating content of other people, being generous in what you're sharing. And then, a lot of times that will follow. People will feel the same way. And I always say that you may give and you may be generous and you may think it's going to come back in one place in one way, but don't expect that. It can come out in a totally different way.
So
So
true. So
lower the
true.
expectations and yet have high expectations for yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And planting seeds is just something that I think is a way of life. It's thinking about how can I add to the stream of life? How can I add to somebody else's journey, whether I'm sharing their Instagram posts into Instagram stories, or I'm leaving nice comments, or I'm liking things. I always say in social media that, we all post and then we check back to see who wrote on my post or who liked, but everyone else is doing the same thing. So it's better to show up on someone else's post, I think, than necessarily even posting your own stuff. Not sometimes, not that you
And
have
I
to
would
choose
say
one.
that, don't go crazy with social media because the algorithm is so skewed now. It used to be, if you had a Facebook page and everybody saw it and all that, it's also skewed, and X, Twitter, whatever, that's kind of lately not being as helpful to authors. And there are other things that are being found that are more helpful. Like maybe if you want to write a book, create a Substack and start breaking down your process of your book, and maybe start it for free and then see how many people join and then maybe offer something. Like on
Mhm.
my Substack, which is estelleserasmus.substack.com, I offer for my paid subscribers pitching advice, and I'll break down their pitches and help them with that. And then I'll maybe later use it in either an episode of Freelance Writing Direct or on my Substack for everybody who signed up. So there's just, different ways that you can offer value. And I think the mistake is when you think that you don't have anything to offer. And when you put yourself in a position where you say, oh, no one wants to hear from me, because there's always something that you've learned that you can share. I do believe that.
I think so too. Well, it's been such a lovely conversation. You've given so much in just a short period of time. I can't believe we've been on for almost an hour. And I think that that gives me just so much more desire to read your book and to have everyone get it, because you're so full of fun stories and so much knowledge and references. And I think that for anyone who's wanting to build the craft of writing, it's writing. I guess what I'm hearing is that it's not just the writing, it's connecting with other writers, it's connecting with the writing community, it's constantly learning and being part of the bigger picture. That writing isn't, mistakenly, I think people think writing is an isolated endeavor, and it's really not.
No,
Maybe
it
when you
is.
sit down to write your article, you
Yeah.
got to have some focused time, but I think that the collaboration between the editor and the publisher and people you interview and research you do and organizations you're a part of and conferences you attend. And all of that makes for such a rich environment. So connect with Estelle on her website, estelleerasmus.com. And I so appreciate you. Be sure to get her book, Writing That Gets Noticed. I'll also link that in the show notes. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for reaching out and being a part of the iBook podcast. And
Thank you, April. And I also have
listen,
the whole section in my book on how to come up with ideas and brainstorm ideas and break writer's block. So even if you're just at that very little inkling of an idea, this will help you. So
I
thank you
love
so much
that.
for having me.
You're
It's
welcome.
such a
I know
pleasure
we
having
could
this
we
conversation.
could continue talking on so many topics here and writer's block and all of that's in your book. And I think it's been such a wonderful time to spend with you today. So thank you so much. Be sure to check the show notes. Be sure to connect with Estelle anywhere on social media through her website, get her book, and you will have no shortage of ideas and ways to become a better writer.
Thank you so much.